The East African region is upbeat about the competency-based curriculum, and as an organization that is really focused to ensure that we ease that implementation, this is one among many of our contributions, because we believe that life skills and values cannot be taught separately but can only be integrated. And as we've often said, you only can measure what is important. So we believe life skills are important for the development of the child or the learner at school, at work, and beyond. So that is why we are bringing into fore such kind of contributions. At this moment, allow me to continue welcoming those who are joining us. I'm aware that some media personalities are with us, and thank you very much. If you have any questions as we continue, just chat on the reply. Post your reply on the chat, and you'll be able to pick it. Should you think that we're not picking it, you just let us know by raising your hand. And of course, at the end of the presentations, there'll be a session for question and answer. So thank you once again for your time. As ALiVE, we don't walk alone, we don't work alone. And even in this media campaign for the ALiVE book entitled The Contextualisation of 21st Century Skills Assessment in East Africa, we have a partner who is helping us run this campaign online, that is AVSI USA. It is a non-profit organization created in 2000 to work with individuals and communities in developing countries to restore dignity and build resilience in the face of poverty and marginalization. Thank you very much, AVSI, for your support in this campaign. And now going to introduce the panel. We have three persons that are going to help us delve deeper into not just the content of the book, but also the context, so that we see how relevant it is within the education systems in East Africa, and I must say beyond East Africa, because we don't just develop knowledge for a region, we develop knowledge within the context of the region, but it can be shared and adopted in other regions. So the first speaker is Professor Esther Kerr. Professor Kerr is a renowned researcher who works with government and non-governmental organizations on education reforms with a focus on 21st century skills and assessment. She is currently working with us in the ALiVE initiative, which is a part of the Regional Education Learning Initiative in East Africa on assessment of life skills and values. And she's also been the technical lead in the ALiVE program. She has a lot of experience working with us in this journey of the book and beyond. Let me just reiterate that she's worked on skills issues within education context in Australia, in Asia, Africa, and South America. And in Africa, we are blessed to have her. So I just want to have Professor Kerr coming in, and to note that she's also the author of chapter 1 of this book that is looking at global to regional, from 21st century skills to life skills in East Africa. Professor Kerr is also one of the editors of this book, alongside Dr. John Mugo and Dr. Mauro Giacomazi, who is also part of us. Professor Kerr, this is your time.
Thank you, Ray. Good to speak to you all, I hope. I think maybe you can imagine, if you're looking at your screens and you're seeing the image in front of you, the blue image, and you can see the book down in the right-hand corner, there's an incredible amount of information in that book. And I think Devota just gave you some sort of an idea of the history that is packed inside that book. I'm not going to talk so much about the details within the book, but make a couple of comments. One is that I will talk about this issue of region, why we focus on region rather than necessarily just country. And the other thing I'll talk about is a little bit about the book itself and how the authoring teams managed to put together the narrative of what they've been involved in. So first, talking about the regional, why is there a regional focus? And we have the regional focus that is in the book itself, as implied by the title, and then of course we have the regional focus in the work itself that led to the book. And so if we think about the regional focus of the book, It's reflecting East Africa as represented by Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that it's representing all of East Africa. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything is representative, but it takes a contextual approach. And again, this is in the title, and I'll come back to the contextualisation issue in a moment. Now, for me, it makes a lot of sense to look at this matter of transversal competencies or generic skills from within a regional perspective rather than looking at just one country alone. So I want to explain that. If you work just within one country on this matter of transformation of education, working within one country alone diminishes the learning opportunities for other countries. All right, there's many factors that influence how countries design and implement in their education sector. And if you look at just one country, that doesn't help you identify what might be unique to that country or what combination of factors might be unique to that country. And that means that even where you have a country that is really outstanding in terms of its achievement, study of that one country alone might not help other countries seeking to learn, because it won't be clear what is seminal or what is key to its success, because you're only looking within inside that one country. So working with a group of countries overcomes that problem. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that working with a group provides an opportunity to identify what is common within the group. So what are the commonalities across the countries? When educators across countries that are working together can see what is common, it also provides an opportunity to see and explore the differences. But they can see those differences from a viewpoint of equality, because they already share experiences, the experiences that they found in common. So this is quite unlike a country, say, I don't know, like Cambodia, for example, looking to a country like Sweden and trying to share learning experiences. Those countries are so unlike that attempting to learn from each other would be difficult, because there are so many factors that they do not share in common. Having something in common is a useful starting point, and that provides an excellent platform to explore how different directions and decisions within each of the countries within a region might impact on design and implementation decisions. And so collaboration is key. I know we hear the word collaboration sort of thrown about everywhere, and sometimes maybe it's not always useful, maybe it's not always efficient, but in this case, collaboration is key. Where I've seen in the past groups of 10 to 13 countries within Asia working together and 10 to 13 countries in Africa to come together to explore transversal competencies, I've seen the enthusiasm that generates among the participants from the different countries. It typically provides a message of common purpose and sometimes of shared frustrations, but it can be very motivating. And those sorts of patterns are seen even more clearly when you work in groups that are smaller, groups of say 3 countries. And so again, I've worked with groups of 3 countries, both in Asia and in Africa, and here we have in ALiVE the 3 countries and the 4 jurisdictions working together, where the countries together can actually do the work. So it's not just discussion, it's working together, it's solving problems together, it's dealing with the frustrations together as they develop the tools for assessment and understandings of the skills. And often they learn by seeing the struggles that each other are dealing with, and they can identify, because they have a common core, a common set of understandings, they can more clearly see some of the differences as well, and therefore they can learn from those differences and apply some learning that to their own country. And so this, of course, goes to the matter of resources. If you work together regionally, you can share your resources. If we think specifically about the work that ALiVE has done so far in assessment, there have been many, many steps in the development process. And we've been able, because of the collaborative across the 3 countries, to implement what is primarily the same program, but have some variations here and there. And where you can vary a particular factor or a particular element, that means you can find out what works better or what does not work so well. And then you can use that learning to apply back to countries. So where you've got a very, very complex set of processes, which is what we've had, then you can learn while doing and adapt for each country as you go along. So that's been one of the great values of ALiVE. And that moves us from the assessment phase, which you'll see in the book when you read, to now. And so we'll be talking about now, I assume, as we go through the next little while. But to be clear, the Contextualisation, the Springer book that you see there, it's about capturing the assessment effort, capturing the narrative, and it highlights that matter of contextualisation, that understandings of skills must be true to the context. The book describes how we went about that process of assessment, and as a consequence, we now know that we can measure generic skills, we can measure them at large scale, and we can do it using a household-based model. However, note that the focus that we took was very much on individual skills or values, one value. ALiVE is now at a different point and starting to move concretely with education systems across the 3 countries to explore the matter of skills development or education. And this is very different. The obvious question now is, we know how to assess the skills. How are countries going to nurture those skills? And that, of course, then immediately raises the question of what are the characteristics of these generic skills, such that we can intentionally nurture them in formal education systems. And that's precisely the question that many systems have been contending with across the world. And so the knowledge that ALiVE now has about the nature of skills, from having looked at individual skills, can be translated into thinking about what are the characteristics of generic skills that will make them lend themselves to teaching and learning in a classroom. And so that's now where the focus is moving. And again, if we work regionally, it means that across the 3 countries there can be cross-fertilisation, as the curriculum group in one country tries something and it works well or needs some adaptation. Another country can be in the room and see that happening and so benefit from that experience. So that's my take on regionalisation. I'm going to shift now, not for very long, because you don't want to listen to the same voice for too long, and just talk about the book itself and a little bit about the journey of getting there. It's one thing to do work, it's another thing to write it up. And often when you're writing about something, you need to delve even more deeply into it than you've had to when you're doing the developmental work. And so our authors in all of the teams had yet another learning journey to take as we wrote the book together, because it's not just about doing, it's recording it so that you can share that knowledge. So what carried the process? Because it's not easy. It's not easy writing a book, not easy writing a chapter, not easy writing a page sometimes. And I think that the history of the success is about the will to tell the story. Many, I think, in the ALiVE teams during the development of the assessments developed a great sense of pride in the work that had been achieved. And that process had been difficult in its own right. Understanding that skills are understood and conceptualised differently in different countries, working out how to use those understandings to develop tasks. It had been a really long and often a very frustrating process. And so as the team emerged successfully from that process, I think that was part of then the wish to tell the story and the willingness to tell the story, because there's enthusiasm and motivation and success to start you off. There were challenges, and I'll talk about just 3 of those. First, we had to write in a particular style, more academic style. Not too academic because we wanted the book to be readable, but still a different style from that which you might use for reporting on your work back in your workplace. And so the teams needed to change their writing styles. How did we deal with that? We had some online learning seminars to outline the process and the protocols. We outlined chapter structures, and we gave a lot of editing feedback along the way to help people move into a different genre of writing. The next challenge was about maintaining a narrative that each of us finds a particular topic very interesting, and we just want to focus on that and talk about that. But that's not enough. A book is not about, or in this case, this book anyway, is not about a whole lot of individual standalone chapters. It's about chapters that will come together to tell a story. And that means that everybody has to be somewhat aware of what everybody else's role is. And so every now and again we had to go back to teams to say, no, you've got to rework that because you're leaving out the narrative that we need to maintain throughout the book. None of us likes to go back over our work. I mean, I'm one of the worst people here. I want everybody to say everything I write is wonderful, but of course they never do. They come back and they tell me what needs to be changed. And what we needed within all of the teams is generosity of spirit to listen to feedback and to deal with that. And I think we were probably reasonably lucky because we were working in virtual environments for much of the writing, and I think that means that you read the feedback, you sit back and you think about it. You don't have an immediate response back to the person who gave it, and that gives you a little bit of time to think through, how am I going to respond? Oh, okay, I just have to get down to it and do it. And then I think the final big challenge that I saw was that everybody was still doing their normal routine work. And how do you fit in something that looks as though it might take a very, very long time? And the way we dealt with that is just being very, very clear about timelines and about due dates for the different rounds of revisions and so on. And so we needed to stay on track. You have the due dates, you have reminders, and then you have a little bit of flexibility every now and again, because we need to understand that our whole world is not writing a book. Our whole world is doing everything else that we do on any given day in every way. So for me, I think keeping the narrative going was the important thing, and intervening when any significant meanders were emerging. And so we all had to stay on song until we could put out a book that described where we've been and hopefully will give some ideas about where ALiVE will head in the future. Thanks, Ray.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Kerr, for that elaborate appreciation of our journey, as well as the context, bringing it from the global to the East African region. And you rightly put it that we have to understand skills, and the skills have to be true to the context. And how much the power of documentation, imagining that all these people who have contributed to the book just maybe talked to themselves, wrote to themselves, and did assessments among themselves and kept to themselves. But here at ALiVE, we are opening knowledge for shared learning across all platforms. That is why I would like to keep on inviting those who are joining in to be checking our pages at ALiVE ALiVE_program with double M-E. At this moment, allow me to introduce our second speaker, who is also our principal investigator in the ALiVE initiative, Dr. John Mugo, who is the Executive Director for Zizi Afrique Foundation. I know many of our colleagues in the media space have known him from the times he was at Uwezo, and now with Zizi Afrique Foundation extending even the development of that organization to incorporate life skills and values through the ALiVE program. So Dr. John Mugo, as many of you may know, he's based in Nairobi, Kenya, and his research and programs address key themes connected to foundational learning, whole youth development, parental engagement and empowerment, and assessment of core competencies and values. He leads the Action for Life Skills and Values in East Africa and collaborates with the Ministry of Education in using evidence to support 100% transition to secondary school. And of course, we are now looking at also TVET and beyond. Dr. John Mugo is a principal investigator of ALiVE. He is the author of chapter 12 of the book, that is the ALiVE book, that is entitled The Implications of ALiVE Process and Evidence for Policy and Practice in East Africa. And he is one of the editors of the ALiVE book. At this moment, allow me to also say that you can use the hashtags ALiVE book and ALiVE assessment. I'm just going to type them in the chat box. But I want to welcome Dr. John Mugo to bring us the story of telling the African story in the African voice, the power of context and the power of capacity. As you may be knowing, some of these authors are writing for the first time in their academic lives. So welcome, Dr. John Mugo. Let's appreciate this journey together.
Thank you so much, Ray, for the kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to Esther, who might be in another space. First, to appreciate everyone who has come, because as I finish my submission is that the journey of having our children acquire life skills and values to compete with other children globally in the coming years requires everyone. And so you are coming here, we hope, is also enrolling you to a movement that we need to create for the children on our continent. Thank you to Devota, who framed very well ALiVE and where we are coming from, but also Professor Esther Kea, who has been our teacher. I have edited other books, but this ALiVE book has been a different kind of story because of the content that it contains, of the complexity of the issues that we are dealing with. I wish to bring to attention the fact that the ALiVE book is not just a book, but hidden in that book are many stories. And I will highlight 3 stories that ought to be understood by anyone who holds the book. First is the story of capacity, the second is a story of knowledge, and the third is a story of voice. And I'll speak briefly to each of these stories. So the story around capacity. When we began ALiVE around 2018, 2019, there was one scoping study that was conducted in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and also India. In East Africa, it was led by a scholar called Dr. Sheila Wamahio. And the finding was rather what we all would imagine, that the area of 21st century skills was largely an aspiration for us, but the expertise was sitting in the global north. A lot of people working in the US, others working in other areas like Norway and Germany and France. And whenever anything we would come across, any assessment that was conducted in Africa or any tool that was developed, it was actually led by mainly the scholars and experts from the global north. And so there was the need to start a project of self-empowerment, because as Africa, we cannot always complain. without doing something about it, learning how to do this. So the ALiVE ended up as a story of self-empowerment, where we got into the stage with the humility of admitting we don't know and we need to learn. And thanks to Esther Care, who, when we approached her if she could accompany us on this learning journey, she stepped forward. And as Devota mentioned, now the first process that took over 45 weeks, learning through doing, we ended up 47 of us who completed that process. So as we speak now in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, there are these people that are there. Some are in the university, others are in the examination councils, others are in the curriculum institutes, and we now know how to contextualize these competencies. We know how to work with them to develop frameworks to inform measurement. We know how to develop items and combine items into a task, and to develop a tool at least for the few competencies we have worked with. But more important is the fact that even the ALiVE book itself was part of capacity enhancement. And good to report that we wrote this book ourselves. Of course, you'll find some co-authors who are there, like Esther Care and others, like Helene Kim and others who are our friends who we are working with and who are part of our movement. But a majority of the authors are people who participated in developing and conducting the assessment. And 50% of them are people who are authoring for the first time, and we thank Esther Care, my co-editor, for the grace extended to people who had never written an exam, an academic paper, or published, and Devota is one of them. So that is something to be really proud of, that when you read the book, it's not just about what is contained in it, the content, but also who has authored and for what purpose. The story of knowledge. This is an emerging field. When you look at any knowledge available, any publications around 21st century skills, there is a lot of admission that we don't know everything. And even though we have developed a tool, the ALiVE tool that we are offering to the world, this is not the best way to measure, and it is not the only way, but it is one of the ways that we have discovered as working in our context. So this field, if you look at publications and who has published, again you find that it is mainly knowledge developed in many countries, the developed countries, because of course of the availability of resources to do this kind of work. But also you discover that very few of these publications are about Africa and about African context. And even the little available is by Global North experts telling the sharing knowledge on Africa. And so the knowledge that is shared by this book is uniquely, knowledge from Africa by Africans to the world. When we launched this book at CIS in Miami, this global education conference that was happening in March in Miami, one person asked us, if this is an African story about self-empowerment and all that we talk about, why are you coming to launch it in the US? And our response was, it is proudly that we bring this knowledge to the global north, because this is where a lot of people that have been working on this issue are. This is where many decisions are made that affect Africa. And it might be for the first time that we have such a strong delegation of Africans coming to share knowledge on the global platform that we have generated ourselves. So it is not about where we are launching. It is about what and for what purpose. And so this contribution to global knowledge by ourselves is something that we are really proud of. And that story is a story of voice. Africa's story is largely told by other people. and because it's usually a beautiful story. So you find a lot of contestation, a lot of competition, and hardly do you find Africans being the ones at the front of telling our story. As Professor Kea has mentioned, context and contextualization is key, and that's, we had to argue a lot about the title we give to this book. And when we realized that we were arguing mostly about whether to use social-emotional learning, 21st century skills, life skills and values, and settled on 21st century skills. But we hardly spoke about whether we need the word contextualization on the title or not, referring to the clarity of what our work is about. It's about the context. That these competencies, unlike other more universally known and transferable competencies, like reading, when you read in one language, it's easier to read in any other language. But when we talk about problem solving, it's about not just problem solving as a process, but also the kind of problems you solve, the kind of problems adolescents solve, the kind of problems children solve, and all this happens in context. And so our own voice became very critical, and this book was conceptualized as an avenue, as a microphone to amplify our voice as people who are deeply rooted in context, as people who are born and grew here in East Africa, being able to capture, to tell our story, and not just us as scholars or people who are working at the national level, but contextualization took us to the villages. We went to 15 districts across the 3 countries, not just at the district headquarters, but down to the village, sitting down with parents of adolescents, sitting down with adolescents themselves, sitting down with other people that work with adolescents, catechists, imams, social workers, and now consolidating this voice. So what you read in the ALiVE book is indeed something that amplifies not just our voice as interveners, but the voice of the children and adolescents of East Africa. And the future, we see this book as just one building block to where we are headed, and Devota and Professor Kea alluded to this. The problem of having our children having problem solving, collaboration, self-awareness, and all these values is a very urgent one for Africa. By 2050, 40% of the global workforce will be supplied by Africa. Right now, if you see and look at what is happening, a lot of planes are heading out every day with young people to the Middle East, with young people to Canada and other places, unskilled, and which means the returns to Africa for the export of labor is actually very meager, because we are basically exporting an unskilled, but also lack of competencies that can also lead to some level of competitiveness. And so if Africa is to reap from this demographic bulge of having many young people, it will have to be also then carrying the competencies that are needed. And because of the uncertainty and the rapid development that is happening, right now you don't just learn one thing and stay with it, because things are changing every day. And so the agility, the adaptability that is needed is something that speaks to the 21st century skills. And so achieving this dream of having our young people having these competencies will require everyone working on it. It will require religious communities, it will require governments, teachers, parents, scholars, and the media, and everyone joining the movement. And so this book is a building block to the movement, is to announce that we are here, there is this we are starting, and what we hope to achieve by 2030 is a situation where we have millions of people understanding what these competencies are, teachers understanding how to assess their children and contribute to them acquiring this, parents understanding and creating space, and changing our parenting styles to adopt change. And so we welcome you, and this book is a little contribution to it, to join this movement so that the dream we have for our children can become real during our time. Thank you, and back to you, Ray.